On our air quite a few times in the past year. I don't know how many Saturday mornings you've done, Raywat Deonandan, you University of Ottawa epidemiologist, but thank you for getting up and spending some time with me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you've seen and commented on restrictions all around Canada. How unique is Manitoba's approach, not only in the measures themselves, but in the attempt to be proactive here?
Well, the uniqueness is actually getting ahead of the curve, which is a good thing. And also there appears to be a focus on these low immunization areas, as you noticed, which is strategically important. So that's impressive. Overall, something's got to be done. And so I'm glad Manitoba is doing something. And it looks like they're trying to target the suffering in a way to not inconvenience a great many people, but just those who need to be.
Now, of course, you're an expert in spread of viruses, and you know, this does delve into the psychology of it. Does this help or hurt the effort to pick up immunization? Because we know really we could be going chasing our tail for a long time here if we don't really pick up those numbers.
It's a good question, you know, like there's something to be said for, hey, let's let it blaze through the population and deal with the havoc and the suffering. But then at least people will learn to be afraid of the disease again and maybe increase vaccination. And also those who don't will recover and you get some immunity that way. I don't know. I would never advocate for letting it blaze through the population. By the way, it's just a bad thing to do. Mm-hmm. But will this result in more uptake of the vaccine? Bit by bit, people are getting there, bit by bit. And over time, eventually, almost all will get there, as we've seen from other vaccine campaigns historically. It's just the time frame that's challenging here. We haven't got a lot of time to wait for people to get on board. So we've got to do what we can to encourage and cajole them.
Now, of course, we know private gatherings, especially indoors, were a big source of spread in these past waves. You know, Manitoba has seen lots of restrictions on private gatherings, but usually they were blanket restrictions. Now we have the tool of vaccines, so they are differentiating. Do we think this, this will be followed to the letter, especially, among these target groups? Because, for a person who is vaccinated, they can kind of carry on as scheduled, but the unvaccinated people, in some cases are also those who are resisting public health orders.
It's a good question. So it's unclear how effective it will be. It depends on how well these restrictions are enforced and whether or not stigmatization is wanted or not. I mean, there's something to be said for cajoling via shame. There's an argument that we don't get people on board by stigmatizing them and pulling them out. It's actually not true. It's actually worked really well in the past with things like the anti-smoking campaign. So that strikes me that there's some of that going on here. It's pointing people out by saying, look, because you've chosen to do a certain thing, you don't get access to these boons in society. So hopefully this is a further encouragement to get them on board. This kind of approach, though, has to be tailored to the culture of the population. I don't know if that's the case here. I don't know if that's been carefully thought out. I guess we'll wait and see.
And, of course, we know, with gatherings and people, talking word of mouth does a lot. We talk a lot about misinformation online and on social media, but I've even overheard conversations, where folks are misinformed, but they're, spreading what they think is that information to others. So, when it gets around a group, especially in a community, a small community that may see themselves kind of on the outside of society, and we do have quite a few Southern health communities that would consider themselves to be, in that regard, those folks continue to gather with each other. First of all, it's an opportunity for spread. And second of all, it's there's no opportunity for, a break in this trail of misinformation. So how do we break in there and, try to convince them otherwise?
If I had the answer, I'd be a Nobel Prize winner by now.
Yeah.
It strikes me that you don't get there unless you get the cooperation of a couple of leaders in those communities. And there's something around the way we talk about this disease that has been insufficient. I think we need to take cameras into the COVID wards and show the extent of suffering, show the overflowing capacity. Any shots of hospitals we see in the news media are stock footage, or they show nurses walking down the corridor. And I get there's privacy issues at play here, but there's probably a way we can show the actual suffering and then show the teams of people who are walking around vaccinated, not suffering. An important statistic that never gets talked about is hospitals are overflowing with unvaccinated people. Hospitals are not overflowing with vaccine-injured people.
Yeah, and that's one of the big talking points of those who are hesitant and or defiant.
That's exactly it, right? Exactly how common is vaccine injury? I mean, doesn't not happen, but it's so vanishingly rare. This is not a public health crisis. What is a public health crisis is the disease itself. And ultimately, pretty much everybody is going to know someone or know of someone who has died of COVID within your personal lives. That should be sufficient. And everyone's going to know hundreds of scores of people, possibly, of people who've been vaccinated with no ill effects. And I don't think a lot of rational thought is being said around that. It's easy for us to amplify those small signals that you hear about. Oh, my cousin's friend's wife got the vaccine and was in hospital for a week. Okay, that might be true. It's anecdotal. That story gets pushed on way too far. The story does not get pushed is the 5 people I personally know who died of horrible deaths of this disease. So you got to weight the stories accordingly.
Well, University of Ottawa epidemiologist Raywat Deonandan, appreciate the look into our new approach from your perspective, and I'm sure we'll talk in the weeks ahead as we see if this is an effective way to combat a fourth wave. And like you said, it's a proactive approach, so hopefully before we really even see one here in Manitoba.
Absolutely.
University of Ottawa epidemiologist Raywat Deonandan joining